Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. So, the headline for today's show is With God on Our Side. It's a famous song by Bob Dylan, which begins, "Oh, my name, it is nothing. My age, it means less. The country I come from is called the Midwest. I was taught and brought up here the laws to abide, and that the land that I live in has God on its side." I mention that because there is a battle going on in the United States, presidential race between Joe Biden and Donald Trump about who is the better friend of Christians. According to the Associated Press, President Donald Trump billed his trip to Ohio Thursday as a chance to promote economic recovery, but he quickly pivoted to a deeply personal attack on Joe Biden, even questioning without foundation the former vice president's faith in God. Oh, without foundation. Oh, okay. Even for a president known for his blunt criticism, Trump's remarks stood out, and they signaled how contentious the campaign may get over the coming months. Oh, it's just getting contentious, or it's about to get contentious? It has been ridiculously contentious or hysterical ever since Donald Trump came down the golden escalator in 2015. In 2016, we were told that Trump was a fascist, a Nazi, worse than a Nazi. That's Sarah Silverman. And since he stole the election, or Putin stole the election, and he is a Russian puppet, etc., etc., etc. Oh, but now it's going to get contentious. Here's what Trump said. He's following the radical left agenda: take away your guns, destroy your Second Amendment, no religion, no anything, hurt the Bible, hurt God. He's against God, he's against guns, he's against energy, our kind of energy. I don't think he's going to do too well in Ohio. Biden responded, "For President Trump to attack my faith is shameful." So, what happened after that was a whole bunch of people not known for their religious faith, or especially their, how shall we say, sympathy towards Christianity, leapt to Biden's defense, and it was pretty amusing. Pretty amusing. Let's see, David Axelrod, Director, University of Chicago Politics, a senior political commentator, CNN. What would we call him? Obama's guru. He responded yesterday, "One thing we know is that Joe Biden is a man of deep faith, which is what allowed him to survive unthinkable tragedies in his life. Imagine Donald Trump, of all people, accusing Biden of being against God. Trump hoists the Bible. Biden lives by it." Yes, noted biblical scholar David Axelrod. And I responded, "Oh yes, Joe Biden is practically a saint. You're going to claim the stigmata for him soon enough." Look, this is, I can tell you how it's worked in Canada, which is that the best people to push through an anti-Christian, anti-religious program are lapsed Catholics, or Catholics who, let's say, putative Catholics who do not hold the beliefs of the church. Our abortion laws in Canada were liberalized, as they say, by Pierre Trudeau and his justice minister at the time, John Turner, both ostensibly Catholics. When Pierre Trudeau died, my word, what a spread the church put on for him. Of course, they put on a tremendous spread for Teddy Kennedy as well, another devout Catholic. If you look at the prime ministers of Canada in recent times, besides Pierre Trudeau, John Turner later became prime minister for a brief period. Joe Clark became prime minister for a brief period. Jean Chrétien was prime minister for a rather longer period. Paul Martin, prime minister, again, a Catholic. And now Justin Trudeau, an ostensible Catholic, who has demanded that all liberal MPs, embrace abortion as a positive good. Yes, a positive good. So let's see. Oh, yes, the Brooklyn Dad Defiant, Proud Papa, Perpetually Pissed, Blue Wave 2020 Feminist, the Resistance, BLM, Go Joe. It says LMAO, the guy who broke all 10 of the commandments, just told a crowd in Ohio that Joe Biden is against religion, will hurt God and hurt the Bible. I'll just leave this here, to which my response was, big fan of the scriptures. Are you? Yeah, they're all coming to the defense of Catholic Joe Biden. The only Catholics that can put up with are traitors to the church. Let's see. Rowati Kaylee says, oh, yes, the Lincoln Project, never Trumpers, said that Joe Biden is a devout Catholic and regularly attends Sunday service. He has to be a little careful about that, though, that he's not denied communion, as has happened to Joe Biden. The last time Trump went to church, he gassed peaceful Americans. Rowati Kaylee responded, Sunday service. Yes, we call it Mass. We don't call it services. We can tell you are as much devout Catholics as he is dimwits. And again, from the same source, it is a well-known account. Sister Marie Bernadette Subaru, is in the convent of the Sisters of Charity in Nevers. It is 1870. War is raging throughout northern France as the Prussian-led German armies marched towards Paris. The first printed version of the account, published while she was still living, is the following. A visitor came to Bernadette at that time and made her the following questions. Did you receive in the grotto of Lourdes or after then any revelations related to the future and fate of France? Did not the Blessed Virgin deliver any warning for France? Any threats? No. The Prussians are at our gates. Does that not cause you any fear? No. Thus there is nothing to fear. I fear only bad Catholics. You do not fear anything else? No, nothing else. And that has been the political role, as I say, of Catholics in Western politics, is to be the acceptable face of immorality. That, oh, well, you see, I'm a Catholic, so when I tell you that abortion is good, that abortion is so good that the Little Sisters of the Poor must be forced to divert money to helping the poor to buy birth control and abortion pills for their employees, well, that's perfectly acceptable because a Catholic, a devout Catholic, said that. Now, the use of this term devout Catholic has irritated me for decades because I suppose only a confessor could know whether a man or a woman was truly a devout Catholic. But as far as I can see it in the media, all Catholics are devout Catholics except for those like Sinead O'Connor, who tear up a picture of the Pope on live TV. That's a pretty low bar, but that's the state that we are in now. You know, famously, when John Kennedy was running for president in 1960, at the time when there was still a great deal of suspicion of Catholics in the United States, he was summoned to attend a conference of Protestant divines where he told them that his Catholic faith would not influence any decisions that he made as president, which of course is not the sort of thing that a Catholic would say, a believing Catholic would say. If your faith does not influence your thoughts, your decisions, well, then you don't really have any faith. Compare that to the famous story about Hilaire Belloc, which happens to be true, that in 1906 he was running for the Liberal Party for a seat in Manchester, nonconformist territory it was, and he was asked at a public meeting whether he was a papist, and he pulled a rosary out of his pocket and he said, "Do you see these beads? I say them every morning after I get up, and I say them every evening before I go to sleep. And if that offends you, I pray to God that he will spare me the ignominy of representing you in Parliament." And the crowd was much taken with his honesty, and he was elected. But no, we can't have Catholics motivated by their faith. You know, we can have agnostics and atheists motivated by their lack of it, and that's perfectly acceptable. Of course, we can have Muslims motivated by their faith and Sikhs motivated by their faith, but Catholics, no, unless they're Joe Biden. Oh, let's talk about November 3rd, the election, and what's going to happen or not on that day. Ryan Landry, whose book, Masculinity Against Madness, I highly praised last week and commend to you again, writes today, "Curious leak of Democrats wargaming a contested election came out this week. Nothing ever makes it into the media unless the regime wants it to be in front of the public. This seeding the ground for problems in November. We continuously hear about Trump destroying norms when it is the left and administrative state doing the norm wrecking, par for the course, but it puts us in dangerous territory. Actually, last election's faithless elector campaign was dangerous territory. Professor Lessig of Harvard ran a faithless elector initiative that the Clinton campaign contacted. I consider this a no going back moment. The left suddenly made it acceptable in a portion of the public's mind that 270 electoral votes did not mean 270. Now, you need a cushion if the regime's propaganda organs deem you unworthy, that is to say, anyone right of Clinton. This did not work, but it opened up a Pandora's box for elections. The wargaming, with none other than John Podesta at the helm, seeds the public discourse with falsehoods. Biden would not concede, but then asked governors to send electors against the law. Legislatures do that. It mentioned the House siding with Biden and Senate Trump. What's there to side with? If no one gets 270, the House state delegations vote state by state, and the GOP holds that edge. This is terrible for our low info nation. It sounds like a bad Olympus Has Fallen Civil War edition screenplay. Then the magic phrase, well, no one knows how the military would intervene, so now we see the target. The brass must save the day and get rid of Orange Badman. After their behavior in June, does anyone trust them? Sworn to defend the Constitution, so what? Dear Generals is constitutional, and what is leaked white paper full of inaccuracies? They need that fig leaf of responsibility. My favorite part was the West Coast seceding. Please, please do so. Nothing but upside. That's how broken America is, where a significant chunk wouldn't care if they did. Maybe big tech could wrangle favorable terms in that new land, but there's great options to handle it. War with them, which would be a cinch in Oregon or Washington, when I really mean Portland and Seattle. Blow the bridges in the Rose City and let the left eat each other. Better route is asking all those red counties and said West Coast states if they want to come back. I'll take that and leave that thin strip of coast for the left. Finally, Jefferson is born, and East California is no longer in servitude to San Francisco and LA. These releases are terrible in the nation's current hysteria. It is additionally harmful when the mayors of cities are making it very clear that they will side with rioters over cops or over other residents. We lived in an armed society, a heavily armed society. The regime should be more careful with how they act. all because they cannot wait at worst 4 more years. There is something else worth leaking if Biden is so far ahead. He is not uh, so far ahead. Maybe he isn't. I mean, he is obviously a very weak candidate for reasons I don't think that I need to repeat. This is a story from the New York Times, August the 2nd. Picture this Thanksgiving: turkey, football, maybe, tenser than usual interactions with relatives, and perhaps a new tradition, finding out who actually won the presidential election. You see, the idea is being seeded here that, ooh, well, they count the votes. That doesn't show who won the presidential election, especially not when there are millions upon millions of votes to be harvested in the days or perhaps weeks after November the 3rd. He continues, the coronavirus crisis means that states like Pennsylvania may be counting mail-in ballots for weeks, while President Trump tweets false allegations about fraud. We'll get back to those false allegations in just a minute. And the last barriers between American democracy and a deep political crisis may be television news and some version of that maddling needle on the New York Times website. I spoke last week to executives, TV hosts, and election analysts across leading American newsrooms, and I was struck by the blithe confidence among some top managers and hosts who generally said they've handled complicated elections before and can do so again. And I was alarmed by the near panic among some of the people paying the closest attention. Oh, alarmed. I would say delighted is probably the better word. The analysts and producers trying and often failing to get answers from state election officials about how and when they will count the ballots and report results. The nerds are freaking out, said Brandon Finnegan, the founder of Decision Desk HQ, which delivers election results to media outlets. I don't think it's penetrated enough in the average viewer's mind that there's not going to be an election night. Well, yes, the New York Times has declared so. QED. The usual razzmatazz of a panel sitting around discussing election results, that's dead. Well, no, presumably they would be discussing the results that are in. Would they not? First, there's already a shift underway from a single-day in-person election. In the 2018 midterms, only 60% of the votes were cast in person on election day. Yes, that is very bad. Very, very bad. The election campaign goes right up to November the 3rd, and those people who are voting before November the 3rd, they have not got the whole election. Many votes will probably be sent in this year by mail or cast in September and October, even before any debates. That risks coverage misfires. In 2018, cable news commentators spent election night suggesting that the blue wave hadn't arrived, but they were simply impatient. The Democratic surge showed up when the final California races were called weeks later. If the 2016 election had been conducted amid the expected surge in mail-in voting because of the coronavirus crisis, the Pennsylvania results might not have been counted until Thanksgiving. Then there's the continuing Trump-era political crisis, often driven on Twitter and Facebook. President Trump last Thursday again sought to call mail-in voting into question with false claims about fraud. If you want a glimpse of how this could play out in November, look to 2018 when Trump tweeted the suggestion, call for a new election, when the Senate nominee in Senate in Arizona fell behind as mail ballots were counted. Let me see whether a certain, no, the word harvest or harvested does not appear in this story because that's what they were calling it, vote harvesting. Does that sound legitimate to you? It does not sound legitimate to me. But let's see what the New York Times had to say on October 6, 2012. This story by Adam Liptak. And it is headlined, Error and Fraud at Issue as Absentee Voting Rises. Oh, how about that? It's datelined at Tallahassee, Florida. On the morning of the primary here in August, the local elections board met to decide which absentee ballots to count. It was not an easy job. the board tossed out some ballots because they arrived without the signature required on the outside of the return envelope. It rejected one that said "see inside" where the signature should have been, and it debated what to do with ballots in which the signature on the envelope did not quite match the one in the county's files. This R is not like that R, Judge Augustus Akins Jr. said, suggesting that a ballot should be rejected. Jan Sancho, the election supervisor here, disagreed. This K is like that K, he replied, and he persuaded his colleagues to count the vote. Yes, that's exactly the situation that you want when you're deciding a presidential election, isn't it? Votes cast by mail are less likely to be counted, more likely to be compromised, and more likely to be. Election officials reject almost 2% of ballots cast by mail, double the rate for in-person voting. The more people you force to vote by mail, Sancho said, the more invalid ballots you will generate this fall and beyond. If the contests next month are close enough to be within what election lawyers call the margin of litigation, the grounds on which they will be fought will not be hanging chads, but ballots cast away from the voting booth. And we know that in Nevada, they passed the law, on Sunday night at the last minute, saying that, it's actually in their ballots. They can have assistance. Now, that's just straight up fraud. Straight up fraud. What about old people? Old people, very old people have been voting in elections since forever. If they need assistance to get to the polling place, they are given assistance. Or if they're where they are is sufficient enough, they bring the ballot boxes and the ballots in there. It is not a problem. Oh, COVID-19. Yes, how very convenient that the crisis continues even though people have stopped dying, even though people have largely stopped being hospitalized. And masks for everyone, can't go out. You can't, unless you're protesting, of course. But going to vote, where people could be forced to stand, 6 feet apart, they could be forced to wear masks, but that's not good enough, apparently. Oh, and here's a story from the Boston Globe. A bipartisan group secretly gathered to game out a contested Trump-Biden election. It wasn't pretty. Oh dear. On the second Friday in June, a group of political operatives, former government and military officials, and academics quietly convened online for what became a disturbing exercise in the fragility of American democracy. Oh, it's very fragile suddenly, just like that. The group, which included Democrats and Republicans, gathered to game out possible results of the November election, grappling with questions that seem less far-fetched by the day. You see what's happened here? A media consensus has been created that, if Trump wins the election, he hasn't won the election. It will never be known, really, who won the election, but if it's Trump, it's illegitimate. All our scenarios ended in both street-level violence and political impasse, said Rosa Brooks, a Georgetown law professor and former Defense Department official, a deep state member, who co-organized the group known as the Transition Integrity Project. She described what they found in bleak terms. The law is essentially, it's almost helpless against a president who's willing to ignore it. How about a former vice president who's willing to ignore it? Using a role-playing game that is a fixture of military and national security planning, the group envisioned a dark 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day, in which Trump and his Republican allies used every apparatus of government, the Postal Service, state lawmakers, the Justice Department, federal agents, and the military to hold on to power, and Democrats took to the courts and the streets to try to stop it. Trump can't even get a wall built. There's little that Trump does without some federal judge striking it down or some district judge striking it down. The Justice Department is riddled with insurrectionists, as is the FBI. Is the Postal Service is some bastion of ferocious support for Donald Trump? Is it? And the military has been musing about a coup against Trump since 2017. If it sounds paranoid or outlandish, a war room of seasoned politicos and constitutional experts playing a Washington version of Dungeons and Dragons in which the future of the Republic hangs in the balance. Oh, a Republic, eh? They get it, but as they finalize a report on what they learned and begin briefing elected officials and others, they insist their warning is serious. A close election this fall is likely to be contested, and there are a few guardrails to stop a constitutional crisis, particularly if Trump flexes the considerable tools at his disposal to give himself an advantage. He doesn't have to win the election. Nils Gilman, a historian who leads research at a think tank called the Berggruen Institute and was an organizer of the exercise, he just has to create a plausible narrative that he didn't lose. Oh, you mean like the plausive narrative that the media and the deep state cooked together, that Trump stole the election at the behest of Vladimir Putin, that was so transparent based on the Steele dossier, which was cooked up by Hillary Clinton's people, and the FBI knew that it was bogus. And when the House went to impeach Trump, there was nothing about Russia in it. That's how phony it was. But this is what the media considers a plausible narrative. A plausible narrative is the one in which they win. Consider 2016. There was no plausible narrative that Trump could win because it was Hillary Clinton's turn. Trump was a joke candidate who hadn't run a serious campaign, a man who was blown out of the water by scandal after scandal after scandal, including a private conversation with no less than Billy Bush. But no, Americans are being set up for chaos on November the 3rd by the deep state and its allies in the media. Of course, in 2016, Barack Obama said that a rigged election was impossible. Yes, the sainted Barack Obama. Let's see, according to NBC News, and this is a story from October 18th, 2016, again, Trump is making these unsubstantiated allegations as if, no elections in the United States have ever been rigged. Oh, you could talk about the 1960 election, or you could talk about landslide Lyndon Johnson, 1948. But again, Obama said that no, the campaign, it was just it's all so distributed that it's not possible. Let's see. He said, one way of weakening America is if you start betraying those basic American traditions that have been bipartisan and have helped hold together this democracy for well over 2 centuries. He said that elections can't be rigged because the process for voting for president is so decentralized. Oh, yes, there's 50 states, right? And it's not as if, say, one party or both parties could work, a coordinated campaign across 50 states. It's just so very decentralized. Let's go to the chat here. Oh, before we go to the chat, I should mention that there is an idol or a putative idol of the Never Trumpers, a great figure in American history, who is apparently everything that Donald Trump is not, and that man's name is Ronald Reagan. Of course, Ronald Reagan was divorced. He was the first divorced president. He had been a movie star, and by all accounts, he had availed himself of the sexual advantages of being a movie star, and he never went to church. He never went to church. But why mention that, Why mention that? Let's see. Dan Ellison says Biden's people have balls to even try to portray him as anything but a reprobate evildoer. Again, from the same Dan Ellison, Biden can't even receive communion in half the Catholic churches. Uh, Heck McNeck says Uncle Joe's deep faith helped him deal with the stress of being arrested alongside Nelson Mandela. Yes, I'd forgotten about that one, where Biden claimed that he had been arrested in South Africa. And wait a minute, an American senator being arrested in a foreign country? That would have been front page news. That would have led the news cycles until such time as the American senator had been released. But of course, he was never elected. Chogokin666 says, I'm decolonizing this chat with my black body. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay. Dubois says, I stuck in a boat. I don't know what that means. O'Connor became a Muslim, a win for Claire. I don't know which O'Connor is that referring to. Okay. No, let's talk about Luke Ford, which is another show, which I'm not going to entertain. Clearly, KMG looks like 3/4 of his audience, says Ultra Testosterone. I don't know whether that is supposed to be flattery or not. Deberea says Biden should buy a cottage in Canada and enjoy fishing with his grandkids. One wonders how much Biden's wife, a Dr. Jill, she is a doctor. She's not that kind of a doctor. She's not even a PhD, but you won't call her anything but Dr. Jill. I guess she very much wants to be First Lady of the United States. I mean, look what it did for Michelle Obama. I wonder to what extent she is behind this. I'm going to talk a little bit about conspiracy theories again today, but here's a couple of conspiracy theories. Oh, here's three. Imagine that the Prime Minister of Britain is so disabled by a stroke that he is pretty much gaga for the last year or so of his premiership. That could never happen, right? Well, it did happen to a man called Winston Churchill in the 1950s. Of course, he was never elected prime minister until the 1950s. But he had a stroke, and he was not there. And this was hidden from the public. How about the President of the United States in wartime, no less, being so sick and so close to death that he's not the sort of man that you would want in charge, particularly, at the end of a war in which the whole map of the world was being redrawn. That couldn't be kept from the public, could it? Well, it did, and that man's name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Of course, if you see the pictures of him at Yalta, or you see the pictures of him when he met with the King of Saudi Arabia in 1945, it's pretty clear that he was, this close to death. But again, this was kept from the public, as I mentioned earlier this week. Claire Booth Luce became a hate figure because she just happened to mention the truth in the 1944 election that Roosevelt was clearly dying. How about President of the United States having a stroke and his wife running the country for the last 18 months of his presidency? That couldn't be true. That couldn't be kept from the public, could it? Well, that's what happened to Woodrow Wilson, and his wife Edith ran the country for the last 18 months of his presidency. Justin Proto says, I hope Biden nominates Maxine Waters as vice president. That's a crazy train I'd love to see. Not in terms of laughs, Stacey Abrams, would be the winner in terms of laughs. But in terms of how damaging it would be to the ticket, I think Kamala would be pretty damaging to the ticket. She's not a descendant of slaves. She is famed for using black California prisoners, keeping them in prison so that they can be indentured servants, making money for the state. But no, Susan Rice. This is a scary, scary looking woman. This is a woman who seems to be hell bent on getting the United States into a war with Russia. She can't hide it. Okay. And let's see what else we have here. Anran says the media truly are the enemy of the people. No question about it. And this needs to be repeated endlessly. Emmett Kelly's Earth says in the old days, political bosses would hold back the vote from some precincts on election night and sometimes beyond if they saw a possibility of winning with some stuffed ballot boxes. Well, ballot boxes are more difficult to stuff than say electronic voting, where you just reprogram the machines. But of course, mail-in ballots are the absolute worst because who is this vote from? Well, how do you know? How many times has this person voted in how many different precincts? You don't know, do you? Of course, vote early and vote often is a joke, which is a couple hundred years old in the United States. But it actually requires people moving from precinct to precinct as opposed to mail-in ballots where you don't have to, you can do it all from the comfort of your own home. Edith ran the country into the ground. The VP was kept completely out of the loop. Indeed, Harry Truman was kept completely out of the loop, even as Roosevelt was dying. After he became president, Mr. President, there's something we should tell you about. What's that? You heard of the Manhattan Project? No. Okay, so we have invented a new weapon which is capable of wiping cities off the map. One bomb, city wiped off the map. And Truman was thunderstruck, as well he might have been. William Hicks says the Ken Burns series on Roosevelt had interesting footage of FDR at the Polo Grounds in 1944. They had to prop him up, and the speech was brief. He was extremely ill, and everyone around him knew it. Okay, so let's get back to it here. Yeah, let's go here. Just a second here. Give me a second. Yeah, I'm looking at some cartoons here. One is from the New Yorker, where they have a mail-in ballot, someone mailing a ballot, and guess who is inside the postal box? Well, that would be Donald Trump. You can see his red tie at the front. The president will take it from here. Oh, I see. I thought that Trump has made it clear that he's against mail-in ballots because, he understands that they're an invitation to fraud. But no, even if there are mail-in ballots, Trump is going to steal the election. That's from August the 5th. But someone named Raziel Abulafia has a cartoon with Lady Liberty, no less, pushing the envelope into the post box. Help me, mail-in ballot. You're my only hope. Again, from August the 5th. And someone from Monterey Peninsula College comments, this cartoon is clearly intended to state the opposite inference of the New Yorkers. It rallies all of the shitlibs' favorite tropes in defense of the sanctity of voting by mail, the mawkish patriotism of their favorite national icon, the statue of unlimited third world invasion, is seen here posing in the manner of Walt Disney Company's heroic resistance cokehead Carrie Fisher. Now, this is amazing stuff. Yes, they talk about the cognitive dissonance, the Schrodinger's cat of the left, where opposite things are true at the same time. Because of course they are, because the only, important fact here is Orange Man bad. So whatever best serves to prevent him from winning, that's what we're going to go with. And in other political news, which may have a huge effect on the election, this is from Paul Sperry in Zero Hedge, with much speculation inside the Beltway saying that U.S. Attorney John Durham will punt the results of his so-called Spygate investigation past the election to avoid charges of political interference. Sources who have worked with Durham on past political corruption cases doubt he'll bend to political pressure, and they expect him to drop bombshells before Labor Day. Durham's boss, Attorney General Bill Barr, also pushed back on the notion his hand-picked investigator would defer action. Under Democratic questioning on Capitol Hill last week, he refused to rule out a pre-election release. Under oath, do you commit to not releasing any report by Mr. Durham before the November election? Representative Debbie Mercosal-Powell, Democrat of Florida, asked Barr, citing longstanding Justice Department policy not to announce new developments in politically sensitive cases before the election, and the Attorney General curtly replied, no. Justice Department policy prohibits prosecutors from taking overt steps in politically charged cases, typically within 60 days of an election. Accordingly, Durham would have to make a move by the Friday before Labor Day, or September the 4th. A low-profile prosecutor, Durham has kept a tight lid on his investigation into the origins of the specious Russiagate investigation of Donald Trump and his 2016 campaign, leading to rampant speculation about who he might prosecute and whether he would take action ahead of the November 3rd presidential election. That could well be of historic consequence, since his probe involves both the Trump administration and high-level officials in the previous administration, including Trump's presumptive Democratic rival, former Vice President Joe Biden. Recently declassified FBI notes show Biden offered input into the investigation of Trump advisor Michael Flynn in early January 2017. Another declassified document reveals that Biden was among those who requested Flynn's identity be unmasked in foreign intelligence intercepts around the same time. If Durham announces criminal indictments or plea agreements involving former officials operating under the Obama-Biden administration, or releases a report documenting widespread corruption, independent voters could sour on Biden and sympathize with Trump. On the other hand, kicking the ball past the election could dispirit Trump's base. Yeah, I wonder about that, because this is all reminiscent of QAnon. Oh, that Jeff Sessions, he's just beavering away there at the Justice Department, and he's going to drop bombshells in September of this year, and then the next year, and the next year, and it never happened. But Bill Barr is a far different creature than Jeff Sessions. Bill Barr, who this is his second go-round as Attorney General, he is what they call a swamp creature. He knows Washington. He knows, where the decision, administrative Washington. Of course, Jeff Sessions had been a senator for many years, but he did not know administrative Washington. Let's see. I would find it hard to believe that he punts under any circumstances former Assistant FBI Director Chris Swecker, who knows Durham personally and has worked with the hard-nosed prosecutor on prior investigations. He pointed out that Durham would risk throwing away 13 months of investigative work if he delayed action beyond the election. There's no question that if Biden is elected, everything Durham has done at that point will be canceled out, Swecker said, adding that Biden would replace Barr and possibly even Durham. But by putting indictments and reports into the public arena before the election, Durham would put a Biden administration in the position of either taking further action or closing down his probe. Swecker, who's also a former prosecutor, anticipates Durham will deliver criminal charges, a written report, or some combination of the two around the first week in September, if not sooner. Democracy 21, a liberal Washington watchdog group, has already cited the department policy in recent complaints to Barr, demanding he suspend Durham's investigation and place on hold any further actions or public comments about it until after the election. Oh, isn't what they say, if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't be afraid of investigation? Of course, this is another whom situation. So let's talk now about the right side of history. And what side of history COVID-19 is on? Because apparently hydroxychloroquine it's just a poison. It certainly has no possible efficacy in treating COVID-19. Why, the Lancet said so. Oh, that was a totally bogus report, which they withdrew and apologized for. There was a hashtag trending in Canada yesterday. I stand with Picard, referring to a journalist, Andre Picard, at the Globe and Mail, and someone called Julia Hannigsberg was much exercised. Oh, I see. She's the president and CEO of HB Kids Hospital. Okay, and she said, seeing this trending, and I couldn't imagine why, I stand with journalism. I stand with facts. I stand with science. I stand with integrity. And Picard on health. When the trolls and bots are after you, you know you're on the right side of history. Hashtag, I stand with Picard. I responded, first, there is no such thing as the right side of history. History has no sides. Second, defaming those who disagree with you as trolls and bots is Stalinist nomenclature. No, the idea that history has a side, that it has sides, that there is a right side and a wrong side of history, this is as John Gray pointed out in his book, 7 Types of Atheism. It's a perverted form of Christian teleology. No. Oh, we know where the future is going? Oh, so then I guess COVID-19 and the destruction of society and the destruction of the economy, this was all well understood to be a sure thing for 2020. Was it? Let's see. Andre Picard tweeted, add the subsequent avalanche of tweets from an army of hydroxychloroquine bots and unhinged conspiracy theorists, and you have a concise summary of my day. Poor, poor Andre Picard. I responded, conspiracy theorists, eh? The conspiracy theorists were correct about MK Ultra, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Operation Mockingbird, Jimmy Savile, the English-Asian grooming scandals, Marc Dutroux, and the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The soi-disant experts were wrong. I could go on. But it would seem that the Canadian media, the Canadian elite, has decided to declare war on any skeptics, that these are a bunch of nobodies. These are just a bunch of nobodies. David Jacobs, who is a doctor, Ontario Specialist Association chair, Coalition of Ontario Doctors co-founder, says, no, we're not living through a scandal. We're living through one of the deadliest pandemics in the last century. What is most shocking is a medical doctor pushing conspiracy theories. This needs to stop. This is a response to a doctor called Kulvinder Kaur, who said, we're living through one of the deadliest big pharma scandals in history. Most shocking, frightening, majority obvious, HCQ works as prophylaxis and early treatment in COVID-19. And the elite has declared war on this woman. I don't know, kind of dangerous. She's a BIPOC woman. I don't know whether I'd want to get into that. So, also in the Globe and Mail, Gillian Horton is a Canadian internist and writer. Her memoirs, We're All Perfectly Fine, will be published next year. She wrote today, repeat after me, this is an emergency. Yes, this is an instruction. This is a command. This is an emergency. Yes, so what's the situation in Canada now? Again, there's hardly anyone in being treated for COVID-19, let alone in ICU, and the deaths have pretty much stopped. But this is an emergency. She begins, as the COVID-19 crisis deepens around the world, I've noticed some graphics and dashboards using a subheading, situational awareness. The term has visceral significance. Ooh, visceral. Is it really affecting your body like that? Is it visceral? Is your viscera all messed up because of this term, situational awareness? I don't think so. The term has visceral significance and it works in healthcare or the airline industry because situational awareness can mean the difference between dun dun dun, life and death. Those of us who are interested in metacognition, ooh, that's a fancy word, how we think, tend to conceive of situational awareness as a learned ability to notice and interpret what is happening around us so we are prepared for what might happen next. Critically, it also allows us to anticipate and navigate common thinking and behavior traps. The latter is especially important because our situational awareness in emergencies can be unduly influenced by the behavior, including the underreactivity of those around us. What is a situational awareness? Often it's more helpful to begin by describing what happens when it is absent. Here's a tragic example. A healthy child is admitted to a hospital for an elective procedure. The child stops producing urine and soon his blood pressure is unmeasurable. The staff insist he is fine and that the machines are all malfunctioning. Instead of giving large volumes of fluid and sending him to intensive care, they scour the hospital for working blood pressure machines. While they are looking, the child suffers a cardiac arrest due to shock and dies. You see what she did here? Oh, let's talk about COVID-19, which children don't get, first of all. And in the rare case that they get it, they don't pass it on to other people and they have no symptoms. But let's compare that to a child dying needlessly in a hospital through gross neglect or misconduct. How about that? Sadly, when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic, leaders around the world are falling into the same trap, and so are citizens. Oh, because everything's been opened up, ridiculed, and we're all looking back at what's happened this year, and what was all that about? It's like we went completely nuts over a manageable problem. Is that what's happening? Really? Is that what's happening, Jillian? No, it is not. Why are our brains so vulnerable to this phenomenon? Some of the answer is rooted in our wiring. Our behavioral responses are both learned and dependent on our environment. And when we encounter unfamiliar situations, we often revert to a default setting, looking at what others are doing. This concept is known as social proof. We're aware of the pandemic, but because people around us aren't wearing masks, we're tricked into thinking that what they're doing must be right. Oh, I see. What's the planted axiom here? That we have encountered an unfamiliar situation. No, COVID-19 is a very familiar situation because there are flu epidemics, deadly flu epidemics, which kill millions upon millions of people every few years. In fact, there's a flu epidemic every year. But this, it's the novel coronavirus. So it's unlike any coronavirus that's ever existed. It's unlike any other virus that's ever existed. This problem is compounded by the fact that our perceptions can also be heavily influenced by what we want to be true, a cognitive misstep known as affective error. It's less psychologically disturbing to conceive of a broken blood pressure machine than a child who is critically ill, or a bit of ice on the wings as a meaningless nuisance instead of a potentially life-threatening development. Oh, who believes that ice on the wings of an airplane is a meaningless nuisance? I haven't had all that many, just a few dozen airplane flights in my life, but my experience has been that ice on the wing in any amount is taken very seriously indeed. But here's one of the hardest things about situational awareness. It requires vigilance. and vigilance takes energy. We're all tired of the constant psychological assault on our sense of safety right now. Oh, and who's responsible for this constant psychological assault on our sense of safety right now? So it's tempting to downgrade our original assessments of the threat. Oh, you mean the original assessment of the threat from the World Health Organization, that it was not a big deal and that the real enemy was racism, xenophobia? Let's see. So it's tempting to downgrade our original assessments of the threat, perhaps even to question the experts who are telling us to be worried. Questioning experts? No, we can't do that. Well, what about if the experts disagree? Go with the right experts. Well, how do you know who the right experts are? The ones associated with the World Health Organization? You mean that same body that reversed itself on everything to do with COVID-19? How about the health experts in Sweden and the Netherlands? Are they not experts? Are they a bunch of idiots? Have they faked their expert status? The ability to recognize our knowledge limits is another aspect of situational awareness, by the way, so we don't waste precious time challenging those who best understand what is likely to happen next. This is particularly rich, coming at a time when the experts are telling us, oh, that stuff that we said, a few months ago about COVID-19 and the response, we didn't have very much data, and much of that data wasn't very good. Oh, is this an example of scientific modesty? Is it? The ability to recognize our knowledge limits? No. No, the so-called experts aligned with the World Health Organization just charged ahead blindly, assuming that they were in possession of all of the facts. They say they were not, but no, you should have trusted us then, and you should trust us now. Let's see. I don't want us to be tricked into the false belief that the situation in Canada isn't critical, because it could deteriorate in the blink of an eye. So I want to teach you 4 behavior-altering words that can activate the skills that ultimately allow doctors and pilots to override the false messages our brains send us, allowing us to save lives. And here they are. This is an emergency. When does it stop being an emergency, though? Would it stop being an emergency if no one had died of COVID-19 for a month? If no one had been put in IC unit or a hospital for a month? Would it still be emergency? Because we're pretty much there now. But this woman here, this internist, she is clearly an aspiring member of the elite class, and the message is, don't argue with the elite. Don't ever argue with the elite because your brain is not working. I mentioned a Stalinist nomenclature, and what this woman is saying is that if you disagree with the constantly changing elite consensus on COVID-19, your brain is not working properly. Ooh, perhaps you should be put to a place where we could treat your brain. Let's see, this same woman, Gillian Horton, MD, she tweeted, "You have to love the creepy chutzpah of those random fringe docs who suggest they know more than Dr. Fauci. This book is truly medicine's holy grail, nonpartisan, non-pharma, peer-reviewed, plus, gold standard around the world. And yes, that's his name on it, Dr. Fauci." Ooh. That professor at Stanford, Ioannidis, the one who caused a sensation in the scientific world by pointing out the crisis of replication of studies, that more than half of scientific studies now, the results cannot be replicated. Now, Ioannidis, he has been a COVID-19 skeptic from the beginning. Is he some fringe doc? Is he? I mean, I could quote the names of prominent physicians, Nobel Prize-winning scientists who have disputed the elite consensus on COVID-19, but by definition, they must be fringe because they disagree with Dr. Julia. Douglas Murray writes in Unheard, there is a type of Scot who enjoys nothing more in life than the opportunity to impart bad news. The words that come from their mouth may carry tales of the most appalling woe, but inside they are beaming. Who knows where it comes from, this trait? Most likely some hangover of Presbyterianism, an ultra form of that Puritanism which H.L. Mencken summarized as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. Scottish joy at the opportunity to impart bad news is some extension of this, the knowledge that someone somewhere may have been happy and that the universe has finally made them pay for it. The thought recurred to me as I watched Nicola Sturgeon addressing the Scottish people on Wednesday about a fresh outbreak of coronavirus in her native land. The tableau was almost perfect in its grimness. The Scottish First Minister stood at the podium with a black background. Slightly off to one side behind her was a woman who was signing, not deemed necessary on all political occasions, and adding to the solemnity of the event. Nor did it help that the signer was wearing dark clothes, so that her alabaster white arms and face were the only things flashing out from the pitch black. If this tableau had been given a paint name, it would have been Banquo's Ghost. Sturgeon's words, too, were of the darkest hue. This virus hasn't gone away. If you doubted that today we have evidence of how true that is, it is still out there, and it is still highly infectious, and it is still highly dangerous. The outbreak in Aberdeen is a sharp reminder of that. It shows what can happen if we let our guard drop, and it should serve as a warning to all of us. I just have to break in here. Let our guard drop. Ooh, how do you beat a virus? Constant vigilance. Wait, is that it over there? It's just, if we just put our minds to this, if we just apply situational awareness, we can simply, change the laws of medicine with regard to viruses. We can just, using the power of our minds, of our will, compel the virus to stop infecting people. This is what the elite class is actually telling us now. Murray continues using the language of fires, firewalls, and firefighters. Sturgeon warned our job as citizens, as human beings, is to try to make sure that the fires don't start in the first place. Didn't no one from the audience call out, "You're an idiot"? We can just stop a virus from originating in the first place, particularly when this virus comes from China? That easy, is it? Murray comments, always good to hear a politician remind us that we are human beings. Of course, to hear this talk, you would think that the Scottish people are dropping dead at an even faster rate than usual. As it happens, a certain level of panic should exist in the voices of Scotland's politicians at all times. Life expectancy in Glasgow, for instance, is the lowest for men and women in the whole of the UK. During the years of Scottish Nationalist Party rule, life expectancy in parts of the country, such as Dundee, has actually fallen, a phenomenon rarely seen in modern times outside of Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe. But for the SNP to address such problems on their watch would be to take some responsibility, and Scottish nationalists like Nicola Sturgeon never take responsibility, not when there is Westminster to blame and the opportunity to grandstand by issuing the direst imaginable warnings. And I'm thinking again, how is it that Wales has a government and Scotland has a government, but England doesn't get to have a government, even though that it's England that pays the bills for both Wales and Scotland? What was striking about Sturgeon's words were not just how grim, but how misleading they were. True, the general public in Scotland might have got used to being misled by Sturgeon, but even by her own standards, Wednesday's doom-mongering was extreme. Her words about the lockdown in Aberdeen suggested that the city and wider country was facing a death toll on a gargantuan scale. The figures say something very different. The fact is, there have been exactly 0 confirmed COVID-related deaths in Scotland over the last 3 weeks. An astounding figure. Meanwhile, what non-public sector employment exists in Scotland has been decimated as everywhere by the shutdown, a shutdown that we are told is crucial in order to save lives. Sorry, I was sort of discombobulated there by the use of this word decimated. Is it too late to complain about this? Decimate means to reduce by a tenth. You know, the deci part of it. There's the clue. But people use this word decimated now to mean overwhelmed or close to obliterated or annihilated, whereas again it means reduced by 1/10. It is a shutdown, as Aberdeen's, that has become contestable as more and more evidence emerges, but what is not contestable is that what remains of the private sector will be unable to survive repeated shutdowns of the kind now being imposed. To imagine that they could is to engage in the economics of fantasyland in a country already used to consuming several economic fantasies each day before breakfast. The lockdown announced in Aberdeen is the consequence of exactly 18 new corona cases, including 13 linked to a single pub. This tiny number of cases is the justification for Nicola Sturgeon to quarantine an entire city, 250,000 inhabitants, who are now once again forbidden to enter each other's houses, forbidden to go to restaurants or pubs, and forbidden to travel for any purposes other than work. Well, modern Scotland is essentially a fantasy land. They have a better social safety net. They have better welfare system in Scotland than they do in England. And who is paying for that again? Of course, Northern Ireland is a fantasy land as well. 75% of its revenue comes from submissions from London. But no, it's England that's not allowed to be a nation. Waving the St. George's flag, that's a very bad thing to do. That's racist. So, Dr. Fauci, the United States is the worst, he was saying earlier this week. And now let's get ready for some more good news from Dr. Fauci. According to CNBC, he says the chance of coronavirus vaccine being highly effective is not great. Okay. Is everyone going to have the vaccine despite this? The White House coronavirus advisor, Dr. Fauci, said Friday that the chances of scientists creating a highly effective vaccine, one that provides 98% or more guaranteed protection for the virus, are slim. Scientists are hoping for a coronavirus that is at least 75% effective, but 50 or 60% effective would be acceptable too. Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, said the chances of being 98% effective is not great, which means you must never abandon the public health approach. You see, here we go. Everyone's going to be forced to take the vaccine, but you're still going to have the social distancing. You're still going to have the mouth diapers. You're still going to have the terror. The terror must remain. Okay. So if 50 or 60% effective would be acceptable too, have they considered the trade-off between, the people who are going to be helped by the vaccine and the people who are going to be hurt by the vaccine? It seems to me at effectiveness of 50 or 60%, it is highly likely that more people will be harmed than helped by this virus, especially since COVID-19, the epidemic, is pretty much burned out. Let's see, you've got to think of the vaccine as a tool to be able to get the pandemic to no longer be a pandemic, but to be something that's well controlled. Well, it is well controlled now, if we're talking about outcomes. If we're talking about people merely being positive for COVID-19, that's not the same thing at all, especially since we know that COVID-19 is deadly to people over 80 and not deadly to people younger than that. And when you get to people under the age of, 55, no, practically zero risk. The FDA has said it would authorize a coronavirus vaccine so long as it is safe and at least 50% effective. Boy, that really inspires confidence, doesn't it? And what does the FDA consider to be safe in terms of a coronavirus vaccine? I don't know. I'm not very good on short-term predictions, but I will say this. If the United States government attempts to forcibly vaccine people based on a vaccine which they admit is 50 or 60% effective, they are going to have a serious revolt on their hands. Oh, and in the COVID-19 stupid category, Walmart customers should prepare to have a face mask handy, as the retail giant will soon make them mandatory in all of its Canadian locations. Starting August 12th, all Walmart customers and staff members will be required to wear a mask while inside the store. The commercial giant had already mandated masks at all of its U.S. stores in April. According to Walmart Canada spokesman Felicia Pfeffer, more than 60% of the retail chain's 400 Canadian stores already require face masks due to local government health orders. Customers have done a great job following face covering requirements in those jurisdictions where it is mandated by the local government. We trust that customers in the rest of our stores where we are initiating this policy will respect and follow it and will bring their own face coverings when they should. Well, there is no mask requirement here in Victoria where I live, and there's a Walmart store just outside Victoria in Saanich. Saanich is considered part of Greater Victoria. And I go there from time to time, and I had gone there at the time of the deepest panic. And there was no mask requirement, and no one was wearing masks. Vancouver Island, we have fewer than 150 cases, and I believe 3 deaths. The population of almost $800,000. This is just absolute madness. And of course, we must have one rule for a whole country, despite the fact that Vancouver Island is one of the very least affected parts of Canada. But no, the rules got to be the same for everyone, or else, I don't know, some people will start whining. How come they don't have to wear masks? That's not fair. Let's see, Toby Young writes, sun seekers ignore official guidance on Britain's hottest day of the year. And he provides a picture of lifeguards looking out over Bournemouth Beach yesterday. Seeing pictures like this, it's hard to believe the opinion polls about the extent of public support for continuing lockdown restrictions. He raises a very good point there, and I've noticed the same thing in my own country. Oh, yes, whatever panic-stricken advice or dictates that you give, we're all on board. And then I walk out on the streets and I go into the stores and I find out that that's not how people are acting. So perhaps they say one thing to the pollsters and another thing to themselves when they go about their daily lives. The Mail has compiled a handy roundup of comments from paranoid bedwetters. Oh, furious critics took to social media to slam beachgoers and accuse them of undoing the hard work of lockdown. One wrote, "Here they are again, all the idiots on Brighton Beach, putting us all at risk. They just keep on coming." A second said, "Government, stay away from beaches today. It's hot, but no amount of heat is surely enough to risk your health and the health of loved ones by breaking social distancing rules and undoing all the hard work of the last 4 months of lockdown." You notice that phrase, hard work? When I see a phrase like that, you know, like reckoning, say, it's a recent example. Also Juneteenth, also Emancipation Day. Suddenly you start hearing all of these people, disparate people, repeating the same phrase, which tells me that this is a planned operation, that a memo has gone out, that, oh yes, the hard work of lockdown cannot be jeopardized. Update of elusive government report on collateral lockdown damage. Headline from The Telegraph, lockdown blamed for 16,000 deaths in addition to virus victims. Readers will recall that on July 21st, I asked them for help in tracking down an elusive government report. It was an analysis by several government departments of the collective damage of the lockdown. Eventually, I did track it down. It was published with no fanfare here. The only reason it came to public attention is because Sir Patrick Vallance referred to it in passing while testifying before the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee. Well, yesterday the government published an update, direct and indirect impacts of COVID-19 on excess deaths and morbidity, which was picked up by the Telegraph. The headline news is that the lockdown killed 2 people for every 3 that died of COVID-19 by the beginning of May. However, when you take into account the age of those who died from coronavirus, as well as their underlying health conditions, the loss of life as measured in quality-adjusted life years for those who died as a result of the lockdown was greater than it was for those who died of COVID-19. This is how the authors of the report put it, quote, "The direct COVID-19 deaths account for the majority of all excess deaths. However, when morbidity is taken into account, the estimates for the health impacts from a lockdown and lockdown-induced recession are greater in terms of QALYs than the direct COVID-19 deaths. Much of the health impact, particularly in terms of morbidity, will be felt long after the pandemic is assumed to last." And of course, determining excess deaths in a situation like this is difficult to do. If a man commits suicide because he doesn't have a job and he considers his future to be hopeless, is that a death which can be related to COVID-19? If a man kills his wife because of lockdown and because, he's lost his job and he considers his future to be hopeless, could that be considered a COVID-19 death? Let's see. The article includes some choice quotes from the president of the Royal Society of Surgeons, Professor Neil Mortensen, warned that the health service must never again be a coronavirus-only service. We have to deal first with the most clinically urgent patients, and then as soon as possible with those who have been waiting the longest. The period through August and September is vitally important in making progress before routine winter pressures emerge. Pretty damning, but before you pop the champagne corks with cries of finally, a caveat, the authors of the report claim that the COVID death toll is an unmitigated scenario, i.e. a scenario in which the government did nothing to encourage social distancing and people carried on as normal, would have been a whopping 1.5 million. Total balls, obviously. The relevant counterfactual is not this fantastical, unmitigated scenario, but a continuation of the mitigation strategy put in place by the government on March 16th, in which people were encouraged to observe modest social distancing measures, with quarantining restricted to the infected, the elderly, and the vulnerable. Well, no, 1.5 million people would have died if we didn't destroy the economy and destroy society. Alex Berenson has more on this very curious tale of Ontario nurses and masks. He writes, "The Ontario arbitration fight about masks is really stunning. The background: several Ontario hospitals wanted to make all nurses get flu vaccinations. Legally, they couldn't, so they required the nurses who wouldn't get vaccinated to wear face masks. The nurses filed a grievance, saying that masks were useless and they should not be forced to wear them. Both sides took the arbitration very seriously. A long fight ensued. Both sides called experts and offered evidence. And in 2 decisions, in 2015 and in 2018, separate arbitrators ruled for the nurses. All the experts agreed that there was at most limited evidence that masks reduce risks of transmission, and this is in hospitals, where the risk is many times what it would be in a community setting. The experts found limited risk of asymptomatic transmission. The real issue here, because if you're coughing a lot, you should wear a mask or probably stay home, though they couldn't agree on the details, and this is for the flu, which has been studied way more than the row. And testimony also showed that many nurses found masks uncomfortable and that they tended to have a grunge factor for long periods, when worn for long periods. And so the arbitrators found unequivocally in favor of the nurses' no masks. But hey, this was all before March. All the science changed in March. Science. One final thing from Alex Berenson. Interesting, Twitter seems to be carrying out a purge of my followers. After months of steady increases, I'm down 500 in the last 2 hours. Anyone else seeing this? I don't think I have many bots. Well, there's a simple test that you can do over the internet to find out how many bots you have. I've done this myself, and I believe I was something like 98 or 99% reckoned to be true Twitter accounts and not bots. But I've mentioned it in terms of my own account that Twitter, I don't know when was this, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, froze my number of followers at roughly, what, 8,400, something like that. Yeah, and it's falling gently. I keep, there are several hundred people every month who are new followers, and yet my total number of followers continues to be halted or even to be falling, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. But funny thing about Twitter. 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking about Russell Miller's biography of L. Ron Hubbard. Jim Kunstler writes today, if this first in question mark, summer of COVID-19 has revealed anything about the current version of civilization, it's the profound exhaustion of a culture reduced to going through the motions of its once vital activities. A lot of things that we hope will come back are probably gone forever in the form we knew them, though they will eventually return in another configuration, reduced in scale, but perhaps finer in quality. I miss baseball horribly, and its sad, half-assed attempt to present a rump season with no live bodies in the seats only amplifies the loss. But then I haven't gone to a stadium in 20 years, and I certainly won't pay $100 or more to sit in Fenway Park. I used to go to night games there all the time when I was a starving bohemian writing for the Boston hippie newspapers back in 1972. You could get a decent field level seat behind first base for $5. Wow. When I was a kid in Manhattan in 1960, a bleacher seat in the old Yankee Stadium was a quarter, plus 30 cents round trip on the IRT subway. They weren't writing $100 million plus player contracts until fairly recently either. And of course, that's been a symptom of pro sports' slide into fatal decadence. If baseball does try to stage a full season in 2021 or 22, they will not be selling many $100 seats to an economically demolished middle class. The teams will be functionally bankrupt by then, and if they survive restructuring, there won't be many million-dollar players, maybe none. Carl Furillo, the veteran right fielder for the 1955 World Series champion Brooklyn Dodgers, used to work construction in the off-season. He was on the crew that built New York's Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Imagine Mike Trout hanging sheetrock, if sheetrock even exists as a product a few years from now. I can imagine baseball reorganizing into two separate East and West leagues for a while to reduce costly airplane travel, but even that might not last very long. If pro sports survives the political turmoil ahead, it will come out the other side as a strictly local and regional thing, and that will be the theme for all the things we like to do and must do. The idiocy of pro football will not survive at all. Its farm system, college sports, will be long gone. Higher education committed suicide with its dual racketeering model. First was the college loan racket, in which schools colluded with the federal government to jam too many customers through the pipeline who didn't belong there and who buried themselves under a lifetime debt obligation they could never escape. The second was the intellectual racket of creating sham fields of study that contaminated all the other humanities with poisonous bullshit theory and eventually even invaded the STEM disciplines. COVID-19 screwed the pooch and all that, scotching the 4-year party hardy in residence part of the deal. For now, who needs an online class in contemporary sexual transgression, $2,000 a credit, when you can just click on Pornhub for free? Hundreds of colleges and universities will be going out of business in the years ahead. The outlook for the big centralized high schools is also pretty dark. The teachers' union's insatiable needs are only part of the picture. Consolidating many smaller schools to save on administrative costs seemed like a good idea at the time, but we ended up with thousands of gigantic schools that looked like insecticide factories and felt like minimum security prisons. They all depend on the costly yellow bus fleets to collect the kids from far and wide. The whole scheme ended up as an elaborate daycare operation that actually retarded the development of young people into functioning autonomous adults. COVID-19 and the economic collapse it triggered will put an end to all that. How will the school districts cope with an epic loss of tax revenue from all the homeowners defaulting on their mortgages? They won't. Schooling will have to reorganize, and probably at a very grassroots level, with homeschools evolving into neighbor pods of tiny schools, and only among parents who have the literacy and numeracy to pull it off. We'll be lucky if, years from now, we'll see something like local academies spring up that can handle a few hundred students. I'd also warn you about assuming that the internet is a permanent installation of the human condition. It depends utterly on a pretty fragile electric grid. We do, after all, have libraries, and maybe they can be persuaded to stop getting rid of all of their books. These COVID months have prompted Americans to pass the idle hours of joblessness and anomie with Hollywood's canned entertainments. Could that be all over too? The theaters were already sucking wind before the virus landed, relying on an ever more brain-dead repetition of comic book movies, while the quality product moved to cable TV. Now that's saturated, with the newer product fermenting into garbage. But who is going to keep paying for all that with unemployment at 30% and moving higher? Are you already bored out of your skull with reruns of the old classics? People truly need narrative art forms to make sense of reality, but they have to be tuned to the times we live in. My bet would be on the eventual return of live theater on local stages for original stories keyed to the new post-collapse reality, which will not be understood via Star Wars or Breakfast at Tiffany's. Broadway is finished with its endless reiterations of old hits, and also, of course, because New York City itself is only beginning a long journey down the drain before it can be reorganized into a functioning entrepot. I got half a mind to invest in an outfit that can put on puppet shows in my little flyover town. As you can surely tell by now, the trend is local and smaller for all of these things. That may even be true for national elections and the venerable thing called the United States of America. The Democratic Party was initially only striving for mere suicide, but lately it looks like they want to destroy the country altogether, and they may succeed beyond their wildest dreams. 50 years from now, several separate American nations may be sending their own regional baseball league champions to some kind of World Series, if we're not still at war with each other. So, Kunstler has been talking up regionalism, localism, small is beautiful for a long time now, and he didn't anticipate that a virus or the panicked response to a virus would lead to this situation. But his big prediction would appear to be coming true. Let's have a look at the chat. This summer of our discontent, says Chogokin666. Not enough discontent for my liking. Not even close to enough discontent. But I'm reminded that I've mentioned this many times before. The Pareto distribution in the American Revolution or War of Independence, depending on taste, that only about 20% of the colonists favored the goals of the revolutionaries, and only 20% of that 20%, that's 4% of the American population, were willing to take up arms. And sometimes that is all that you need. It'd need alcohol to make it work, says Glib Medley. What would that be? Eating outdoors in the humidity? Can't even go to the damn pub, says Chogokin666. Kevin's luxurious pillows. I don't know how luxurious they are after me, using them for 2 weeks now? Something like that. A little less than luxurious. Although, again, when I was staying at the Days Inn, king-size bed. I once had a queen-size bed a long time ago, but king-size bed, that's a very big bed. That is a very big bed indeed. It's more bed than I need, but I'm not going to complain. William Hicks. Kevin, what do you believe are the odds of the total number of recorded deaths in 2020 ends up basically the same as 2019? I'd say that's more than even money bet. No question about it, because the total number of deaths is not something that is easily faked. Not something that is easily faked. Claire Caw says, my pub would be called the Sneeze in the Mask. Sounds like a crowd pleaser. Quachalango, Yo Mama agrees with my pedantic rant on the word decimate or decimation. Cheers to you in another time zone on Monday. I don't know that I'm going to be in another time zone. Banff is still freezing. I was there a few weeks ago. Huh. Victoria's heaven, says Debreas. Well, you know, I've lived in various parts of Victoria. I've lived in the suburbs. I've lived in Saanich. I've lived a couple of different places in Saanich. I have lived just off downtown, and I have lived on Fort Street, near Oak Bay, various places, but I've been, you know, downtown for the last couple of weeks, and I'm just, it's dystopian. Dystopian is what it is. I saw a man come into my hotel this morning. I don't know whether he was a guest, but he had hair, long, mostly gray hair. I guess he was like 60 or older. He had hair down to his shoulders and beyond, completely unkempt. He was unshaven. What he was wearing, a t-shirt and cut-off shorts. And he had a bag that was taped to his leg, and there was yellow liquid inside it. And then I looked at the tube, and clearly there was a catheter inside him. And I thought, I've never seen that before. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. That is to say, you get a different view of Victoria when you're not living, you know, close to downtown. Actually, the downtown Victoria it's rather like an American downtown in that there's the tourist section of this. It's rather like San Diego. Downtown San Diego was abandoned decades ago. Now, you know, a half mile away, you have the tourist section, which is hopping. It's a little closer in Victoria, but the tourist section of Victoria is still thriving. But the traditional downtown is, it's pretty dire. It's pretty dire. Okay, let's talk about today's book on the book club. Let's see, here we go. There it is. You see that? Oh, we lost it. Wait a minute. Sorry about that. There we go. Is that better? Can you see that? It's called Barefaced Messiah, The True Story of L. Ron Hubbard by Ron Miller. This is a book which came out shortly after L. Ron's death in the 1980s. And it was the subject of ferocious legal battles around the world. It was essentially banned in the United States. There were attempts to ban it in Canada, in Britain, in Australia, and I remember rushing to the bookstore, I think pretty much on the first day, in order to get my copy, because it looked as if, it might be banned in Canada as well. Now, this book was out of print for quite some time. It is back in print again. And I highly recommend this book. Now, you can find the original edition. You can find it on the internet, all of it, at spAINK.net/COS/rmiller/index.html. Here's the most important thing I think to understand about L. Ron Hubbard. That he said, truth is what is true for you. That's a radical notion, don't you think? Of course, George Costanza famously said something almost the same, which is it's not a lie if you believe it. And this was L. Ron Hubbard's philosophy that at the beginning of the book, Russell Miller points out that the story that L. Ron Hubbard told of his own life and the story that Scientology, the religion he founded, perpetuated and perpetuates to this day, is a fantastic story, no question. But the true story of L. Ron Hubbard's life is more astounding than the fictional version. Essentially, everything that L. Ron Hubbard, apart from his name, pretty much everything L. Ron Hubbard said about his life during his life was a lie, and often an outrageous lie. Let's see. Let's get down the facts here about L. Ron Hubbard. He was born in 1911 in Nebraska, and he died in 1986. He had been missing for 6 years before he died. I suppose truer to say that he had been hidden because Scientology was essentially at war with the United States government. The United States government was at war with Scientology and with L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard was chased out of, banned from country after country after country for all sorts of reasons, not least of which he spent years on a ship belonging to the so-called Sea Org, which sort of sailed around endlessly, first in the Mediterranean and the North Atlantic, and then around the Caribbean. And it would put into port for supplies, repairs, whatever. And then people noticed this strange phenomenon that the ship appeared to be run by teenage, pubescent, or perhaps even prepubescent girls wearing halter tops and hot pants. This is the sort of thing that you wouldn't put in a novel or in a screenplay, because people would say, yes, I like a joke as much as the next man, but you go too far. You go too far. L. Ron, now his given name was Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. And again, why he chose to style himself L. Ron Hubbard, it's just odd. I find American naming conventions to be somewhat odd. The middle initial, for instance, the use of the initial. Ronald is a fine Viking name, and Lafayette, of course, from Marquis de Lafayette, that is a fine name too. But L. Ron Hubbard, as I mentioned yesterday, it sounds like a character in some cheap sci-fi movie. My name is L. Ron. But that's what he called himself, and he encouraged informality amongst his followers, and everyone just called him Ron. So let's see. Let's go from the very beginning here. Russell Miller. Oh, I should mention Russell Miller is an English journalist who has written a number of biographies. I have read his biography of Hugh Hefner called Bunny, which I also highly recommend. This book is it is fantastic. It is disturbing, and it is often hilarious, because you just think, how many whoppers can this fellow tell? And the whoppers just get bigger and bigger and bigger the older he gets. And of course, what's disturbing is that how could people believe any of this? A great many of the people attracted to L. Ron Hubbard at the time that he began formulating what became known as Dianetics the science of mind over matter. These were highly intelligent people. Of course, a great many of them were science fiction writers or fans. And one of the things that impresses one about this book is not to trust the judgment of either science fiction writers or science fiction fans. They are credulous people. Let's see. The book begins: for more than 60 years, the Church of Scientology has vigorously promoted an image of its founder, L. Ron Hubbard, as a romantic adventurer and philosopher whose early life fortuitously prepared him in the manner of Jesus Christ for his declared mission to save the world. The glorification of Ron, Superman and Savior, required a cavalier disregard for facts. Thus, it is every biography of Hubbard published by the Church is interwoven with lies, half-truths, and ludicrous embellishments. The wondrous irony of this deception is that the true story of L. Ron Hubbard is much more bizarre, much more improbable than any of the lies. According to the colorful yarn spun for the benefit of his followers, L. Ron Hubbard was descended on his mother's side from a French nobleman, one Count de Loup, who took part in the Norman invasion of 1066. On his father's side, the Hubbards were English settlers who had arrived in America in the 19th century. It was altogether a distinguished naval family. Both his maternal great-grandfather, Captain I.C. DeWolf, and his grandfather, Captain Lafayette Waterbury, helped make American naval history, while his father was Commander Harry Ross Hubbard, U.S. Navy. All of these claims are false. His father was a career Navy man, but he wasn't particularly ambitious or accomplished, and he did not rise to the level of commander, not even close. And he did not take part in battles. He was involved in supplies. He was at sea for a lengthy period. The story goes, little Ron grew up on his wealthy grandfather's enormous cattle ranch in Montana, said to cover a quarter of the state, approximately 35,000 square miles. His picturesque friends were frontiersmen, cowboys, and an Indian medicine man. L. Ron Hubbard found the life of a young rancher very enjoyable. Long days were spent riding, breaking broncos, hunting coyote, and taking his first steps as an explorer. First, it was in Montana that his first encounter with another culture, the Blackfoot Indians. He became a blood brother of the Blackfeet and was later to write about them in his first published novel, Buckskin Brigades. When he was 10 years old in 1921, he rejoined his family. His father, alarmed at his apparent lack of formal learning, immediately put him under intense instruction to make up for the time he had lost in the wilds of Montana. So it was by the time he was 12 years old, L. Ron Hubbard had already read a goodly number of the world's greatest classics, and his interest in religion and philosophy was born. This is a quotation from an official biography, and Miller comments, virtually none of this is true. And then he goes on to say that when the Church of Scientology learned about this, the existence of this book, or what was to become the book, Miller worked for the Sunday Times magazine. Essentially, they demanded control of the book, and Miller said no. And so the Church of Scientology declared war on him. He was constantly being followed. He was constantly being threatened. People associated with him, the Sunday Times, were being threatened. Scientology put out a story that his wife was, a Nazi or a communist? Of course, L. Ron Hubbard himself, all of his enemies were either communists or Nazis, without a question. He even claimed that one of his wives, his second wife, was a Nazi. Oh yes, his wife was born in East Germany. And various people show up, harassing everyone involved, making threats, trying to frame him for a murder, no less. But of course, anybody who has read anything about Scientology knows that this is standard operating procedure for them. According to the report in the Sunday Times, the church paid more than £100,000 to private detectives to discredit me. And keep in mind, this is in the 1980s, so we're talking about what? We're talking about a couple of $1 million now. They used police contacts to check whether I had a criminal record and to implicate me in unsolved crimes. People were brought in from abroad posing as journalists to arrange interviews with Scotland Yard where they would drop innuendos about Miller, the whistleblower said. Other investigators were used to smear his name with colleagues, friends, and neighbors. They worked hard on the line that he was an undercover British intelligence agent. Of course, following L. Ron Hubbard himself, who was obsessed with the idea that the CIA or other foreign intelligence services were determined to bring him down. What is most outstanding about this book is the research that Miller has done. He got the goods. He got primary documents, thousands of primary documents. When Miller states that despite the 26 or 44 medals that L. Ron Hubbard was supposed to have been awarded by the U.S. Navy during the Second World War, I believe he got 5. This is shown to be demonstrated to be true over and over again by official records. L. Ron Hubbard made increasingly absurd claims about his role in World War II, that he had ended the war blinded and crippled. Well, he may have suffered from an ulcer. He was a incompetent sailor, perhaps not spectacularly incompetent, but grossly incompetent. And it was rather eye-opening to me, rereading this book, to note how much you could get away with in the U.S. Navy during World War II. Now, obviously, when you have sailors, ships all around the world and documents in all these different places and no centralized depository, yeah, that's part of it. But another part of it is that the U.S. Navy needed men. And okay, so L. Ron Hubbard fails, and he fails, and he fails. Also, all the other officers hated him, and they were deeply suspicious of him because L. Ron, from the time that he was a teenager, he was a braggart, and he never stopped bragging. He pretty much never stopped talking, actually, and he insisted that he knew every aspect of human knowledge. He knew it. It was right here. He knew better than the people who were supposed to know these things, and he was not shy about letting people know this, with the result that people who were actually trained in their jobs despised him. Let's see, claims made by L. Ron Hubbard. I could speak for hours about this, but let's see. Not long after he had started work, this is the whistleblower who provided much of the documents for this book, Jerry Armstrong. Not long after he started work, posters appeared in Scientology offices announcing the private screening of a 1940s Warner Brothers movie, The Dive Bomber, for which Hubbard had written the screenplay. Every Scientologist knew that Ron had been a successful Hollywood screenwriter before the war, and the screening was to raise funds for the defense of the 11 Scientologists, including Hubbard's wife, who had been indicted in Washington on conspiracy charges. Armstrong decided to help by finding out a little more about Ron's contribution to the film, but at the Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in Los Angeles, he was puzzled to discover that 2 other writers had been credited with the screenplay of The Dive Bomber. Armstrong remonstrated with the librarian, then sent a memo to Ron to tell him about the mistake in the Academy records. Hubbard replied with a cheery note, explaining that Warner Brothers had been in such a hurry to distribute the movie that it was already in the can before it was realized that his name had been left off the credits. He was busy at the time, closing up his posh apartment on Riverside Drive in New York, and was getting ready to go to war. So he just told the studio to mail the check to him at the Explorers Club. After the war, he used the money to take a holiday in the Caribbean. And needless to say, he did not write this. Hubbard claimed to have had a rather fabulous Hollywood career, and his only credit is of one of his books was purchased to make a serial. He claimed to have written Stagecoach. Yes, that's right, the 1939 classic by John Ford. starring John Wayne. And needless to say, he had nothing to do with Stagecoach. But L. Ron Hubbard claimed, well, he claimed he was a glider pilot for a couple of years. One of the reasons why he flamed out, as it were, from George Washington University was because he refused to study, and he preferred to fly a glider plane. But he claimed records. He was constantly claiming records in everything. Oh, also claiming that, he was well ahead of the Germans in rocketry in the 1930s. He was constantly backdating everything that he ever got involved in. And to get to the disturbing aspect of this, how much money did L. Ron Hubbard have when he died? Well, the figure $1 billion has been thrown about. L. Ron Hubbard claimed that he had been to heaven twice. Not metaphorical heaven, the actual heaven twice. And I think the first time was 26 trillion years ago, and the second time was 25 trillion years ago, something like that. He also claimed that, or friends of his claimed that he could move clouds with his hands, that he could travel through time, that he could, travel spectrally. So why was he obsessed with obtaining money and gold? He had a particular fascination with gold, and for a very long period, his Sea Org was engaged in these pointless travels to where he believed that he had hidden gold in previous. As I say, he studied engineering, and he quit because his grades were terrible. They wouldn't have let him back as a student in any event. And so, what to do? He couldn't make a living with gliders. He'd always, as we've seen, had a tremendous imagination. So he started writing pulp stories. Pulp magazines were very popular after the First World War, and many famous writers, such as Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, appeared in pulp magazines. And he was pretty good at it. He started selling stories. And he ingratiated himself he went to New York City, ingratiated himself. He had planned a campaign to become a big name in pulp. Problem with pulp, as Philip K. Dick found out, is that you have to write an awful lot, and you don't get paid all that much money. And this was L. Ron's problem. I suppose another problem was that he had a wife and family at this time, and they were in Bremerton, Washington. Now, L. Ron grew up as a Navy brat, but you see with L. Ron how rootless he was. I mean, there seemed to have been no kind of interest in finding a home. The number of places that L. Ron Hubbard lived in America alone, let alone the rest of the world, is really rather astonishing. I don't know what, being on a large ocean vessel, basically describing a triangle, around the Mediterranean, North Atlantic, or the Caribbean. This is this is about as homeless as one can get. But L. Ron moved into science fiction, and he charmed John W. Campbell, who was I suppose the godfather of the second golden age of science fiction. And it was around this time that, I should mention that L. Ron Hubbard was a serial philanderer and adulterer who abandoned his first wife and children. He was a bigamist as well. And both of these marriages, first two marriages, ended very badly indeed. One could say that his third marriage ended badly because he let his wife take the fall for Operation Snow White, which was Scientology's astonishingly successful attempt to infiltrate the American government at multiple levels and steal tens of thousands of documents. Yep, he let his wife carry the can. He's just sentenced to 5 years in prison. Oh, L. Ron didn't know anything about it. No, it was all her doing. He, as I mentioned before, he claimed his second wife was a Nazi spy. But so it is suggested to L. Ron Hubbard, and apparently it was suggested to him twice, and he later claimed this for his own, as he was wont to do, that if you really want to make money, you start your own religion. During the 1940s, L. Ron Hubbard was a Satanist. In fact, one of America's leading Satanists. That he got involved with a scientist called Jack Parsons, who had a mansion in California, where he performed satanic rituals. The specific satanic rituals of no less than Aleister Crowley, of whom Parsons was a constant communicator through letter. And his second wife had been the lover of Parsons, and L. Ron stole her away. And, well, he later kidnapped one of his children and took her out of the country and actually blackmailed the mother of that child into dropping claims against Hubbard, mistreatment. He was a terrible father to his children. I suppose one of the worst examples of this is when he decided to get the Explorers Club to get behind his scientific journey to Alaska. He was always making up these scientific journeys, and there was no science whatsoever. It was just excuse for him to go on a trip on a boat. But when he took this scientific trip to Alaska, he got as far as Ketchikan when the boat broke down and he had no money to repair the boat. Let's see. I'll read a bit here. It seems Ron told the newspaper, the Ketchikan Alaska Chronicle, that friends had wagered it impossible to sail a vessel as small as the Maggie to Alaska, and that he was determined to prove them wrong. Captain Hubbard covered their bets, and now that he has arrived, will have the satisfaction of collecting. Ron no doubt wished the story was true, for he had hopelessly underestimated the cost of the trip, and they were already so short of money that they could not afford to get the engine repaired. More in hope than anticipation, he sent an angry cable to the engine supplier in Bremerton, demanding a replacement crankshaft free of charge. Meanwhile, they were effectively marooned in Ketchikan. When Ron and Polly, Polly being the wife, were carefully saving whatever they could, a letter arrived from Marnie, relative, saying that Nibs, that was his firstborn son, they called him, he was L. Ron Hubbard Jr., they called him Nibs, short for his Nibs, had been crying all night with a toothache, and she had taken him to the dentist. Ron was angry that Marnie should involve them in further expense and dashed off an irritable reply telling her it was none of her business and she should have waited until they got back. Marnie responded furiously, "What kind of heel are you?" Which is perhaps the best response that I have ever heard to L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron managed to get an appointment to the U.S. Naval Reserve by buttering up politicians, including then Congressman and later Senator, the senator from Boeing. He was later called Warren G. Magnuson, a legendary figure in Washington State politics. L. Ron Hubbard was always putting it about that was on top of everything. When it came to knowledge, he was on top of. He knew more than anybody, and he was always willing to give of his wisdom. After his rather miserable experiences and undistinguished experiences in the war, he starts. He doesn't sell very much pulp fiction, and he's got very severe money problems. And so, as well as several children, well, there's also children, he abandoned and is not paying for. But he comes up with this idea of creating his own religion. And he comes up with the concept of Dianetics, which was published originally by John W. Campbell. And this was, he said, well, I should mention before, there's the existence of this putative existence of this book called Excalibur. And there is no evidence that this book ever existed, but for years, Hubbard told everyone that this book contained the secret to human life, which was survival. And that what the first 5 people who had read this book had gone insane or killed themselves. That's how powerful this book was. Now, people actually believed that that was true, okay? But what was the practical value in that? Well, Dianetics had practical value because it was the triumph of mind over matter. Now, people go to psychiatrists, or used to go to psychiatrists for years and years and years. Dianetics was a one-time cure. That's the way that it was sold. Essentially, it was a form of autosuggestion. That if you convinced yourself that you no longer needed to suffer from psychosomatic conditions, then you wouldn't anymore. But of course, this was later extended such that Dianetics could cure real, that is to say, actual medical conditions. And it was a journey through the past. It was a journey. It was a journey to the obstetrics department. There you were, being born, and things were said, things happened, and this crippled you through engrams, which were implanted in your brain from these experiences. In the womb, later, went back in the womb. Later, back when you were a sperm or an egg, and then later still into past lives. Of course, going back trillions and trillions of years. And the L. Ron Hubbard story just gets more fantastic as it proceeds, because I say, it's just whopper after whopper. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, John W. Campbell pushed Dianetics, and after a slow start, it became an enormous bestseller. The money was just pouring in. Hubbard started these institutes. Hubbard had no sense for business whatsoever. Besides skimming enormous amounts off the top, people were hired, all manner of people were hired. What their duties were unclear. People who were hired who were not competent to do the job. This is a theme which runs right to the end of his life, where you have 13 and 14-year-old girls effectively being in charge of a ship, a huge ship. And so despite the fact that he's selling Dianetics at $500 a pop, now, see, Dianetics claimed that it had a 100% success rate. Now, that for me, no, nothing has a 100% success rate. That's not possible. You'd have to be an idiot to believe in this. But tens of thousands of people, many of whom were ostensibly not idiots, believed in it, and they signed up for what became known as auditing. And people paid money, big money, to be trained as auditors. Hubbard had to be bailed out by a businessman in Wichita who he later, ripped off in a big way. He managed to get control back of Dianetics, which he then turned into Scientology, a religion which was later formally recognized as a religion. And Yes, the weird, the cleared, and the E-meter shuffle. That Hubbard or someone close to him invented what's called the E-meter, where you hold two tin cans and they got alligator clips and wires leading to some sort of machine, and it measures galvanic skin response. And apparently, this was the secret. This was like a truth drug, only better than a truth drug. And it was the secret to unlocking everything about your life and everything about your past lives, etc., etc., etc. But just to give you an idea, just how crazy this was, there was this ship, one of his three ships, the Royal Scotsman, which later became the Royal Scotman. It was docked in Valencia, and a group of students flew in from St. Hill in England to take a clearing course on board the ship. That's what Scientologists, they look to become clear, or later operating thetans. I don't know how much I want to go into detail about what Scientology believes. There's the famous South Park episode for that. L. Ron was on the ship and in a real jolly mood. He used to stay up late at night on the deck and talk to us into the wee hours about his whole track adventures, how he was a race car driver in the Marcab civilization. The Marcab civilization existed millions of years ago on another planet. It was similar to planet Earth in the 50s, only they had space travel. Marcabians turned out later not to be good guys, so it wasn't a compliment that their civilization was similar to ours. Hubbard said he was a race driver called the Green Dragon, who set a speed record before he was killed in an accident. He came back in another lifetime as the Red Devil and beat his own record, then came back and did it again as the Blue Streak. Finally, he realized all he was doing was breaking his own records, and it was no game anymore. People would stand around listening to these stories for hours, very overawed. At the time, it seemed a privilege and honor to share these things. To hear him talking about things that went on millions of years ago like it was yesterday, it was usually entertaining, but I sometimes found it very stressful to take it all in. This powerful, booming outflow, and it was hard to get away. One night I was getting dizzy and dared to ask if I could leave early. I could hear my voice echoing in the cosmos as I said, "If you'll excuse me, I have to go to bed, sir." He said, "Okay, sure." One of the recurring features of Hubbard's past lives on this planet was a penchant for secreting his worldly goods underground, and one of the frustrations of his present life was his inability to find them. He was deeply disappointed that his cruises around the Canary Islands in the Enchanter had not resulted in, hang on just a sec, had not resulted in replacing the schooner's ballast with gold bars. That was his goal. But now he had more time, more ships, and more personnel at his disposal, and in February 1968, he asked for volunteers to accompany them on a special mission on the Avon River. And this goes on for months and months and months. Hubbard was of the belief that the human capabilities were virtually limitless. How about someone who doesn't know anything about a ship at all? We're going to make that person a bosun on a ship, or we're going to make that person a captain of a ship in dangerous waters. I'm reminded of a former boss that I had who had a similar idea that expertise was overrated, that people could do anything, and with company profits, rather dubiously, he bought a yacht and sailed it down the east coast of America and through the Panama Canal, and then supposedly was going to go back up to Vancouver. And the crew of the ship were journalists, pretty much, and I talked to several of them about it. They said it was the most harrowing weeks of their lives, because of course, failure on sea is much more serious than failure on land. And you read in this book, Barefaced Messiah, of these terrified Scientologists who have been promoted, often out of the blue, to positions that they simply cannot do properly. And L. Ron Hubbard was not having any of it. Let's just go back into your past lives. You must have been a sea captain at some point, and then, well, yes, I was a sea captain, and we see in several of these cases that just how powerful auto-suggestion is, that to a large extent this calmed them down, and they thought, well, I suppose I can pull this off. But the last few decades of L. Ron Hubbard's life are rather reminiscent of those of Howard Hughes, increasing isolation, increasing insistence on total devotion. Howard Hughes had his Mormons, while L. Ron Hubbard had his pubescent girls. Oh, and the institution of rather savage penal codes, where people who were found guilty, often again by pubescent girls, forced to spend days or weeks in what's essentially torture jobs, in little hope of escape, even though many tried. Some got out. But it's just more and more paranoia, more concentration of power, more and more craziness. Of course, I mentioned Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was a man of genuine accomplishment in several fields, whereas L. Ron Hubbard accomplished nothing in his life except, bilking people around the world out of $1 billion or more, and ruining the lives of many thousands. I've often wondered, Miller's book does not go, it's overwhelmingly concentrated on L. Ron Hubbard. It's not a history of Scientology. I've often wondered how people could go for Scientology. And I come to the conclusion that, if you're going to lie, lie big. Go big or go home. People have complained, many of the people who've left Scientology over the years have complained about how they pretty much gave everything they had to Scientology, and they were continually asked for more. Now, you compare this with a traditional religion, compare it with Christianity, say. You're encouraged to give money to whatever branch of Christianity you're in, but typically it is not required. You give as much money as you want. As for the holy books, well, you can find a copy of the Bible or the New Testament in lots and lots of places. It doesn't cost very much money. You can find it online. The books of theology they're plentiful and they're cheap, unlike Scientology. And it strikes me that people were attracted to Scientology because it was so fantastic. It was so ridiculous that it required a real leap of faith to believe this. And there was the personal sacrifice. I'm not talking about the people who served Scientology on the Sea Org or whatever, who were often worked to death or tortured or driven mad by the lunatic who was in charge. But, the sacrifice, the financial sacrifice, that this really brings it home to these people. It's tended to unify them to the religion, because it just, it is quite late in Hubbard's life where Xenu makes an appearance. Yes, that dead souls, half a light years away or longer, they were frozen and then brought to Earth billions of years ago to be dropped into a volcano. What? Or L. Ron Hubbard himself. I mean, Dianetics was based on the claim that mind could command matter, and that Dianetics, the use of Dianetics could cure all illnesses at a 100% success rate. But then people saw L. Ron Hubbard, and he got to be quite sickly as he grew older, and he was conspicuously fat, and he took all of these drugs. Well, if his mind was so powerful, if he could actually, travel spectrally, if he could actually visit heaven, if he could move clouds, why would he need drugs? The whole premise of Dianetics was ferociously against the medical community, both psychiatrists, well, and psychologists, and just ordinary doctors. So you didn't need doctors, but L. Ron Hubbard was incapable of curing himself. Although he used to make these um, claims, an excuse for everything. You have to give him credit for that. I mean, I can't think of a better liar than L. Ron Hubbard. He would address a meeting, and he would come in with a limp. He was constantly employing a limp and blaming it on his naval service during World War II and other reasons. But he comes into one meeting with a limp, and he said that he was traveling through the galaxy, and he hadn't really completed it, and he had injured himself in his travels through the galaxy, and that's why he was limping. And people in the audience just ate it up. Anyway, if you haven't already gathered it, I am very much impressed by this book. It is it's a delightful read as well as disturbing. It is thoroughly footnoted. All of the claims made by Miller are they're bolstered by documentary evidence or direct interviews with the participants. You know, Scientology claims that the word they used in a court document was bullshit. But when you have different people over decades saying pretty much the same story about L. Ron Hubbard, essentially that he was a fabulist with no conscience, and there are dozens or hundreds of examples of this, I know that I believe Russell Miller, and I don't believe his opponents. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Russell Miller's Barefaced Messiah. Next week on the book club, I am going to be talking about Piers Paul Reed's The Dreyfus Affair, which is about the accusations of against a French army officer that he was a spy for the Germans. Dreyfus was Jewish, of course. This is a scandal that dragged on for well over a decade and split France in two and led to dreadful divisions that could be said to still exist today. On the movie club, Thursday next week, I'm going to be talking about episodes 6 to 10 of Kieslowski's Decalogue. Let's have a final look at the chat. Kevin, have you seen the Paul Thomas film based on Hubbard with Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix, the master? No, I have not, and I have to say why. I don't like that man, that filmmaker. I hated Magnolia. Tom Cruise was good in it, not to say that. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman was good in everything that he does. But the movie that was supposedly based on Doheny in California, and the oil that everyone was raving about, I hated that too. Boogie Nights? I mean, it's very technically accomplished, I have to say, but I found the movie just disgusting. Just absolutely disgusting. So, no, I haven't seen The Master. Let's see. First thing I'd do if I had supernatural powers, says Chokokin 666, which would be what? Yeah. Okay, well, Halper says The Master is a lot better than Anderson's other stuff. I don't know. I may end up seeing it. I've seen Boogie Nights a couple of times. As I say, it really drags you along, but it is. Oh, the porn industry. It's a big family, and they love each other like fathers and children, or brothers or sisters. It's just so revolting. Hubbard was a Faustian, says GSP. Well, Miller points out that one of the problems that many of the people making accusations against Hubbard were family members, his children, say, like his son. And their lives have been so poisoned that their charges are almost as ridiculous as the claims that Hubbard himself made. I mean, we do know for a fact that that Hubbard was a serial adulterer, and he was a deadbeat dad who abandoned his first two wives and treated his children exceedingly badly. But yeah, it's difficult to be objective about Hubbard, although I say that I think that Miller has done a good job. One of the difficulties about a book such as this is that when you find out just how crazy Ron Hubbard's world was, there's a tendency to say, no, that can't be true. It's not possible for something this crazy to be true. My Trail of Disgrace has recently found a remainder copy of another book on Parsons, Strange Angel, but haven't read it. But both have material on Hubbard and Crowley. I don't like to get too close to this occult stuff because it frightens me. It gives me nightmares. I have a very strong sense of the numinous, and I just I don't know. It's a good idea to stay away from this as much as one can. Many people have come to grief, examining this. Oh, I'm going to examine this in a scholarly way, a disinterested way, even an ironic way. Going Clear, I've seen the documentary Going Clear, which I quite liked, and The Unbreakable Miss Lovely are two other great books on Scientology. Sex and Rockets about Jack Parsons is worth reading also. Yeah, I wonder about this, oh yes, my wife or girlfriend, has left me for this other man, but we're all supposed to be, sharing these women, and the men are supposed to be shared, and so yeah, I'm not going to be broken up about that. I don't think that there's very many men who would actually put up with that. I mean, Parsons was what you might call an alpha male, and L. Ron Hubbard was an odd-looking man, to put it mildly. But he was very successful with women, which goes to bolster my, I don't know, my half-loved theory that the route to being successful with a great many women is to be a massive, massive bastard. So that's my final word for this show. And on that bombshell, I'll say at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already done so. If you would like to contribute, make a donation to this live stream, which would be greatly appreciated at this time of my own personal upheaval. My PayPal address is Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send money directly to me through Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I'll leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge some kind of genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.